If you trace the tangled roots of the internet, history books will point you to the same American laboratories. They will tell you about ARPANET. They will tell you about a triumph of Western engineering. But history is rarely that simple. Years before the first data packets were exchanged in the United States, a completely different network was being drawn up. It was being designed on the other side of the Iron Curtain. It was a blueprint for the most ambitious computer network the world had ever seen, a digital nervous system designed to stretch across 11 time zones, connecting thousands of factories, millions of workers, and an entire continent into a single machine. It was an engineering marvel that could have permanently altered the balance of the Cold War, but it was never built. The Soviet internet was not defeated by a lack of technology. It was not destroyed by American spies. It was suffocated from the inside out, sabotaged by the very people it was designed to save. To understand why this machine was necessary, you have to understand the sheer weight of the Soviet Union. This was a command economy. In a capitalist system, a free market dictates the price of bread or steel. But here, the Soviet state controlled everything. Every single nut, bolt, tractor, and winter coat required an explicit order from Moscow. Central planners had to manually calculate the supply chains for millions of distinct products. Imagine trying to run a modern global corporation, but your only tools are rotary telephones and heavy rubber stamps. Your only computers are thousands of clerks, sliding wooden beads across abacuses. In the early days, brute force and endless paperwork were enough. It was enough to pull an agrarian society into the industrial age. But as the economy grew more complex, the machinery of the state began to break down. It was grinding against its own friction. By the early 1960s, the Soviet economy was mathematically suffocating. The paperwork required to run the country was growing exponentially. But the workforce was only growing linearly. Factories in Siberia would request raw copper, but the requisition forms had to travel by train to Moscow. By the time they were calculated, approved, and sent back, seasons had changed. Production lines froze. Warehouses overflowed with left shoes, while the right shoes were delayed by administrative backlog. In 1962, a Soviet mathematician ran the numbers on this growing nightmare. He reached a terrifying conclusion. He calculated that if the economy continued to grow at its current rate, it would hit a wall. By the year 1990, every single adult in the Soviet Union would need to work in data entry, just to keep the country running. The empire was facing a silent, invisible collapse. They were drowning in paper, and they needed a lifeline. That lifeline came from an unlikely source. A brilliant, uncompromising cyberneticist named Viktor Glushkov. Operating out of the Institute of Cybernetics in Kiev, Glushkov saw the Soviet economy differently. He did not see a political entity. He saw a colossal, malfunctioning equation. He proposed a radical solution. He called it OGAS, the all-state automated system. Glushkov's vision was breathtaking. He wanted to rip out the endless chains of bureaucrats. He wanted to replace them with a nationwide, real-time computer network. It would be the world's first national internet, designed solely to manage the logistics of an entire civilization. No more delayed trains. No more lost requisitions. Every factory, every power plant, and every distribution center would be linked together, speaking the exact same digital language. Glushkov's architecture was a massive three-tiered pyramid. At the very bottom were 20,000 local computer terminals. These would be installed directly on the factory floors and industrial centers across the USSR. Whenever a steel mill produced a new batch of metal, workers would punch the data into these terminals. The information would be translated into electrical signals. It would be sent surging through the country's existing telephone lines. These signals would travel up to the second tier, 200 heavily fortified, mid-level computer hubs, located in major regional cities. Here, the raw data would be processed, refined, and bundled together. Finally, the data would flow to the top of the pyramid, the central hub in Moscow. Here, an array of massive Soviet supercomputers would ingest the real-time data of an entire empire. If a tractor plant in Minsk needed more rubber, the Moscow mainframe would know. It would automatically locate a surplus in a warehouse in Vladivostok, and it would instantly reroute the trains. For a brief moment, OGAS felt inevitable. Glushkov was hailed as a visionary. Prototypes were drafted. The Soviet leadership began pouring resources into the golden age of cybernetics. The ambition of the project was so vast, it sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. Declassified documents revealed that the CIA was terrified. American intelligence warned the White House. They said the Soviets were building a tele-cybernetic weapon, a system that would give the USSR an insurmountable economic advantage. In the United States, computer networks were still confined to linking a few academic laboratories together. The Soviets were about to wire an entire continent, but Glushkov had made one fatal miscalculation. He understood the mathematics of machines perfectly. He fundamentally misunderstood the psychology of men. On October 1st, 1970, the fate of the Soviet Internet was decided. It happened in a closed-door Politburo meeting in Moscow. Glushkov stood before the most powerful men in the country. He requested the final, massive wave of funding required to build the network. His primary opponent was Vasily Garbuzov, the Minister of Finance. Garbuzov did not oppose the network because he thought the technology would fail. He opposed it because he knew it would succeed. A centralized, transparent computer network cannot be bribed. It cannot be intimidated. If the system was turned on, the central mainframe in Moscow would instantly see the true production numbers of every factory. It would expose the inflated quotas. It would expose the hidden stockpiles. And it would expose the profound corruption of the local ministries. Garbuzov realized that automation meant transparency, and transparency meant a total loss of power for the bureaucrats. In that meeting, self-preservation won out over progress. The Ministry of Finance successfully argued that a nationwide network was too expensive. They called it unnecessary. They refused to fund Glushkov's Grand Pyramid. Instead of building one unified network, the state fragmented the budget. They allowed individual ministries to build their own isolated computer systems. The digital nervous system was violently severed before it was ever fully connected. The Ministry of Agriculture built a network. The Ministry of Metallurgy built a network. But none of these systems were allowed to communicate with each other. They used different code, different hardware, and different standards. The dream of a unified Soviet internet shattered into dozens of isolated digital fiefdoms, blindly humming away in the dark, guarding their data like jealous kings. There is a bitter poetry in how the network wars of the Cold War ended. Capitalist America, a society built on competition and individualism, succeeded. They built the internet because they designed a decentralized, highly cooperative network. Meanwhile, the communist Soviet Union failed. A society built on the ideals of central planning and collective unity could not build their network. Their bureaucrats were too fiercely competitive and self-serving to share information. Viktor Glushkov watched his life's work slowly rot away, buried in committee meetings and petty administrative disputes. He died in 1982, his warnings ignored. Glushkov's mathematics, however, were never wrong. He had warned the state about the complexity of their world. He told them that without a digital network, the command economy would choke on its own inefficiency. Less than a decade after his death, the Soviet Union collapsed. It collapsed under the exact mathematical weight he had predicted. Today, the blueprints of OGAS exist only in forgotten archives. It remains one of history's greatest technological phantoms, a monumental machine that could have rewritten the modern world, left unbuilt by the very humans it was meant to save.